I'm not adding anything. You can cut this out. Just kidding. Yikes. I was just going to be like, good point, Nicole. Let me rephrase it in a different way.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of SnarkSquad Pod, the media podcast where we're only here for redemption arcs that are earned. My name is Marines.
I'm Nicole Sweeney.
And today we are joined by what I now feel comfortable calling one of our regulars.
You've done it.
You've done it. Introduce yourself.
I'm Sari Riley. I work for SciShow and Crash Course, and I do, I guess, a little temporary Crash Course. And I do a comic called Monstrous. I'm the editorial assistant for that. And I like media and talking and thinking about it.
Yeah.
And we like you, so welcome back.
It's not like a bring you back and then dunk on all your opinions kind of thing.
No. I am super excited about this episode. I'm excited about every episode, but this one especially because when we started this podcast, we had this idea of kind of recommending media back and forth. And then we started taking recommendations from listeners and from the internet. But this was one of the things that I originally put down on the list, from day one, that I wanted Nicole to watch, and now a guest as well. So today we are talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is an animated series that aired on Nickelodeon. And I believe I'm turning this around to Sari for a plot synopsis.
Yep. I came ready to do a brief one, at least. So, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I hadn't seen this either beforehand, so I was really excited to get to watch it. The premise is there's this nation in which there are four main elements. There's earth, air, fire, and water. And then there are these people called benders who can manipulate these elements using martial arts-like powers. The world was in balance at one point in which everyone had their own civilization, had their own element, and coexisted. But then the Fire Nation attacked, as the intro says.
Before every episode.
I should have just read that and then been done.
Fire.
At the center of all this is the Avatar, which is a person who is born into one of these four nations and learns that bending ability, but they have the capability to learn how to master all of the elements. And in this series, we follow an Avatar whose name is Aang. He's an airbender. When the Fire Nation attacked to take over the world, he disappeared. He had run away from the airbending temple that he grew up in and got frozen in a chunk of ice. At the first episode, he is uncovered from this ice by two waterbenders from a southern tribe named Katara and Sokka, and they become the golden trio of the first chunk of the series. And we follow him as he masters all the elements. It's divided up into 3 books. So first he learns how to waterbend, and that story centers around Katara's growth too as a waterbender. Then he learns how to earthbend, and we meet a delightful earthbender who's blind named Toph, who is the spunky girl. She's amazing and super, super powerful. She learns not only how to earthbend, but to metal bend and pushes the boundaries of what bending could be. And in the 3rd book, he learns how to firebend, and his story really coincides with his main antagonist, whose name is Zuko, who is the prince of the Fire Nation. His dad is the emperor, and he's been, to put a long story short, he has been exiled from the kingdom, and it is his mission to bring back the Avatar, to capture it, to secure the Fire Nation's power within the world. And he journeys around with his uncle Iroh and follows the Avatar for a really long time, has this really, really powerful redemption arc, and ends up joining the Avatar, learning how to firebend from passion instead of hatred, and teaching Aang firebending. And then our merry band of people that we care about now.
That's the saying.
Yes.
Merry band of people that we care about.
That's the word. It all comes together in a final battle where Aang faces off against the Fire Emperor Ozai, I want to say. And there's just this, Aang has mastered enough of the elements to go into an avatar state, use all the powers that he's learned, plus the power of friendship, to face off against this emperor and restore balance to the world in a very peaceful, wholesome way. And that's it. That's Avatar.
That's Avatar.
Oh, I didn't mention Appa, and there's Appa. But we'll talk about Appa.
And Appa. So obviously, I very much love this show because the first opportunity that I had to make somebody watch it, I jumped all over that. But before we jump into, I feel like there's so many themes and so many characters that I love here, but I want to get from both of your perspective because it was your first time watching. Did you like this? Our baseline question, did you enjoy watching this?
I went into this very hesitant partially because I do not watch a lot of cartoons, but also because after like our experience with A Wrinkle in Time, where, you know, I had this piece of children's media that just was not connecting with me, in large part because I was consuming it as an adult. And so I was a little nervous. Both of my siblings love this show, so I have seen it in passing. Like the third season, there were a bunch of things that I was like, oh yeah, I do dimly remember watching this without any context. But yeah, so I went into this with a ton of reservations, but I completely fell in love. I love this show. All of it is great. Appa is my favorite character in the whole world. Appa's the best. I love Appa. Sweet Appa. About halfway through the series, when they find the library, I texted Mari and was like, I think I'm going to get a knowledge seeker tattoo. So I loved this. Sari.
I came into this loving cartoons. Like, cartoons are some of my favorite pieces of media. Comics are some of my favorite pieces of media. I like a lot of media, but it's been recommended to me for years and years. And every time I say I haven't watched it, people are shocked because it's like, I love Asian American representation, or like Asian representation in general. I love cartoons. This is like the epitome of all that. And so I had high expectations, and it like met and exceeded all of them, which is just such a good feeling. Yes, I also loved it. I love, so many different characters about it, so many story choices that they made, and the choice that they made to make it wrap up in such a nice package, like a 61 episode package. It felt very deliberate all the time, which is what I love in the stories that I read. It's like you had a plan, you had a story that you wanted to tell, and you did it.
And you used all of the space efficiently and well. Yeah.
Yes. And you built this beautiful world that is just so interesting and rich and full and funny and just different enough from ours to make it really interesting.
Sometimes I think of media in terms of like whether or not I enjoy it and would recommend it. And so there's media that I love so much that I'm hesitant to recommend it because I don't want other people to hate it. And then there's media that I like love so much that I don't care if somebody else hates it because I love it enough for the entire world. And this is a piece of media that I had in my head that it was like generally just really good. But as soon as I asked Nicole to watch it and we were going to watch it for this, I started like second guessing myself. Like, wait, is this actually good? Like, is everyone gonna hate it? Like, I couldn't really separate my experience of loving it from whether or not, like, from a more objective perspective, if this was like a good storytelling thing. So hearing you guys say that like warms my little heart. I think I'm pretty much done with this conversation. Like,
that's it. Episode's done. Hope you enjoyed episode 16 of SnarkSquad Pod. We're done here.
Okay, we're not done.
Oh.
In rewatching it, I will say that I watched this when I was graduated from high school. So I'm not quite sure when it was. It was after it was off the air, I think. So I was an adult, but in rewatching it for the first time, I will say that part of what I was kind of hesitant about and second guessing is that at least at first, I thought there were elements of it that were very childish. Like, it is a children's show, and there were some bits of humor that are like, about boogers and like very like little kiddish. But I think even at the end end of maybe the first episode, and as this first book 1, season 1 progresses, I think that you really get the play on their childlike demeanor, and then like the weight of what they're carrying, and you know, whether that's Aang because he's the Avatar, but you also have Katara that she's lost, you know, her mother and her father's off at war, and I think there are so many of these heavy themes that you start to really enjoy. Maybe those more childlike aspects. How was that for you guys? Like when you were jumping in?
I definitely noticed the like very childlike element of it. I think for the most part, the childlike nature of it contributes to the world building in a big way. Like that is part of the world, I guess. I don't know if you guys will agree or disagree with this, but it feels like to a certain degree, the world is a children's fantasy rather than just like a fantasy more generally. And one of the ways that like this routinely plays out, I think throughout, even beyond the humor or anything else, is the consequences of battle, like or right. lack thereof, I guess. Like right. that is a thing that routinely I was like, oh damn, like probably you're killing people left and right in reality with some of these big falls and whatever. But because it's a kid show and a cartoon and whatever, everyone bounces back from all of this stuff. And then that ultimately ends up becoming a very big deal in the end that Aang isn't out here killing all these people, but also
yeah, it reminded me of growing up and watching cartoons. Like I watched, it reminded me most of the Teen Titans animated series. I haven't watched any Teen Titans Go, but like that style of humor in integrating animation, and also like the Pokemon animated series. And those are both cartoons that are geared for children, but can be enjoyed by adults, I think. I haven't gone back and watched them a whole lot recently, but it's that same kind of like exaggerated physical humor and like focusing on really good sound effects and really good gross things happening to these characters, and always having like the Sokka character who was comic relief and levity when they were dealing with really dark things. And of course he had his own arcs where he had went through growth too. But I feel like there were elements to the childish comedy that made sense within the context of a cartoon. Like this felt like the kind of comedy that makes cartoons really good, which I'm maybe not explaining super well. But it's like the idea that you can have a boomerang fly through the air, knock people in the head, and have them make a weird expression. Or you can have a Cabbage Man's cart explode because like a bear hybrid creature is inspecting it and like ruffling through it. Right. And those are the kind of things that are funny within the universe of a cartoon because everything is so exaggerated and pushed and pulled and slightly unreal that wouldn't play off in a live action series, that wouldn't play off in other kinds of media.
Yeah, totally.
That are just really great and make me feel at home within this universe.
I think there's also an element. So when you have like Chosen One stories or like super powerful beings, which Aang is. Also, I'll sidebar here and say that I watched the movie more recently than I saw any of the episodes, so I'm second guessing all of these pronunciations of the names.
No. This is a conversation that we are going to have when we talk about the movie. That's our next episode. Yeah. And
I'm just explaining any hesitation before I say a name. I'm like, oh no, it's going to come out wrong. So anyways, super powered people like Aang. And I think that, you know, something that can mess that up within a story when you have a chosen one or someone that's very powerful is how you check that power. And I think that it worked very well to have Aang be very childlike and wanting to go off on these little side adventures and, you know, just kind of being immature. And part of why he disappeared is that, you know, he gets very upset and very angry and he runs away. And that kind of sets everything, the whole story in motion or whatnot. And I liked the idea that aspect of his personality, of him being a 12-year-old avatar, kind of plays into checking his power and his growth overall throughout the series and what is eventually a coming of age story. So
yeah, totally. I think the fact that he is a child and is like really grappling with being the chosen one is a huge part of what makes this work and what makes this story so compelling. Because it is so explicitly educational too, like the fact that his journey is about learning, not educational in the sense of like educational media teaching the viewer, but like that his journey is about learning to waterbend, learning to earthbend, like et cetera, et cetera. And you have a really good push and pull of like he wants to be a child, which means that he like doesn't want to be the chosen one, but like also, you know, doesn't want to do school today. Like I want to go play games and whatever. And yeah, it works super, super well.
Not only that, but it lended itself to a lot of good subplots about family because they're all children and had complicated relationships with their parents or mentor figures or things like that. And there's like, they could really dig into exploring what it means to rebel against something that you've been taught your whole life, like especially in Zuko's case, where was indoctrinated with all this Fire Nation stuff, or Katara and Sokka having to fend for themselves with their dad off on an adventure and their mom being dead. And it really lays the groundwork for the found family that ended up happening with this group of like our core cast of characters in a really interesting way, because I don't know, I really like children's media where like, of course they have to go on this grand adventure, but the way that they make it through is by learning to trust each other and learning how to compromise and learning that there's going to be conflict and like growing up through those conflicts with each other and learning that family is not just blood. I don't know.
Found family.
Yeah. They got hit me in the heart. And this was a good example of it. And because they were so childish, like sometimes their disputes were really childish, or how they were reacting to something differently, or how they reacted to their parents differently, or their responsibilities differently, because they were at different stages of growth. And I think that added a really nice push and pull too.
I love found family stories, and I think what makes it work very, very well here is that this show, we talked about kind of how it had this set number of episodes and did a really good job of telling a complete story. And I think it did a phenomenal job of presenting us with so many fully developed and fully realized side characters. Like this could just easily be Aang's story. He's the Avatar. He's the most powerful one. But I think we get so much time dedicated to each side character and each member of the found family, and they each have their own little mini arcs and their own little journeys. And so when things happen to anyone, whether it's Appa being captured or like Momo, even Momo like going off and doing something, I'm like, oh, Momo. Like there's just such a sense of like being invested in each and every person that you're really watching a story to. So I mean, I feel like I could talk about who my favorite characters are all day, but probably the answer is like most of them.
Right. Yeah.
I was never disappointed because I always wanted to learn more about everyone. So no matter who we were following in a given episode, I was like, yeah, give me more Azula. I want to like learn about her and her relationship with May and Ty Lee, or whatever. Give me an Appa silent storyline and I am invested in what's going on to this poor sweet Sky Bison.
Poor sweet Sky Bison got kidnapped.
Yeah.
So were there any characters that maybe were on the bottom of the list for you that you didn't like as much as the others?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. I was not prepared for that one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's good because it's making me
Were
think.
there any characters that you liked the most?
Not all of them.
Right. I can start. I will say it's not that I liked him the least. But there were moments, this is just like baggage, one of those baggage things. There are moments that Sokka reminded me a lot of Xander from Buffy.
Yes.
And I really, sometimes I really loved him and really appreciated him for what he brought to the table and for being the everyman and for sometimes being like the voice of reason in the midst of it. But sometimes it got played to the other end where he was just being a little bit obtuse and, you know, a lot of times the jokes were played on him or he was like the butt of the joke. So there were times it was just a little too Xander-ish for me, and that kind of knocked him down a few rungs. But again, that is relative because I love them all, but sometimes he was just not my favorite.
I would agree with that entirely. Like, I think like if I had to pick someone, it would be him. Similarly, I had the Xander thought already in this conversation, and I think I think that it is nowhere near the level that it got to with Xander. I think we talked about this when we were recapping Buffy, but one of the problems with Xander was that Nicholas Brendan just never looked 16. And
right.
So it was just like the idea of him as this idiot 16-year-old was like, no, this is a grown-ass man being an idiot. Like, it's not cute. It's annoying. Whereas in the context of this cartoon, like this is a cartoon child, and yes, okay, he's being a child, and like the occasional bits where it felt that way, it didn't bother me because it was very much like, okay, yes, I am feeling like a pull at the edges of where this maybe isn't for me, like, I guess is sort of kind of as much as I would have chalked up those moments to. But like, I agree that on the whole, like, if I had to pick someone, probably him. ? But like also I like love him and cared about his journey too. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I did love everyone. I think I agree with that too. Like, I feel like Sokka pushed my limits where sometimes it was like not funny anymore and kind of eye-rolly. And in the same way, I love Zuko's arc, but he got to an eye-rolly part for me in a couple cases just because he was so angsty. And now that I'm an adult, I like can see that more objectively and see like that whole beach scene where he was talking about, he was with the 3 Fire Nation girls that have also been hunting the Avatar, including like Azula, May, and Ty Lee. And he was like angsting about his relationship with May and being jealous that she was talking to another guy. And then also like grappling with the fact that he hated himself and just went in this big, like maximum angst moment. And it was a good like that is a defining thing about his character, but also I was like, oh, like emo child, gotta pull yourself out of this.
I kind of loved that because it drove home that he is like a teenager. So one of the things that's really interesting is you see like the show differentiates who is an adult because they're like taller than everyone, with the exception of Zuko's uncle, who is shorter than him. But like you see Prince Zuko next to like any of the generals and stuff, and he's always shorter than them. And so like it's like this weird subtle way of like he is older than like Aang and Katara, but he is still just a teenager kind of thing. And like the angstiness, I definitely agree. It was like very over the top angst, like max angst, that him and May have a conversation about how like they hate everything, but they don't hate each other. Yeah. Just like so angsty teen, emo teen romance for sure. But like to me, I don't know. I loved those moments for that reason, because I was like, okay, sure, yeah. Like in the same way that other elements of this cartoon children's story world are over the top and exaggerated, like so too is angsty emo Prince Zuko.
Yes. Yeah, and I want to say I love him. I love his angsty. I love his like pull out of that and into love and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just so hard to choose a least favorite thing.
Now that we're talking about Zuko, though, and all of his angst, how did you guys feel about his overall arc? And was he redeemed for you by the end? Like, where did you stand by the end with him?
I am interested. I want to listen to your episode about redemption arcs, because I haven't thought about redemption arcs as thoroughly. I felt like they handled his redemption in a really interesting way, in that he had to keep apologizing for the things that he had done. And I feel like the tendency in some pieces of media is to have this dark character do one good thing and then have everything like snowball and click, and they are all of a sudden part of the good guys. It was really nice to have a couple episodes dedicated to him approaching Aang and Katara and Sokka and Toph and trying to apologize and screwing up and having to earn their trust, and then go on individual journeys with a lot of people, like prove to Sokka that he cares enough to turn against the Fire Nation, prove to Katara that he cares enough about her mother to like go and try and hunt down, even though it was misguided, it was like kids going on revenge journeys. But I really liked the fact that they spent that time with him so that we could see him evolve from just being like a one-note enemy, like hunt the Avatar, to kind of understand his realization that things are complicated and that firebending can be fueled by not hate. Yes. And that made me root for him by the end.
Yeah, totally. So I have not... At the time that we are recording this, I have not yet edited the previous episode. This was something that I brought up when we were talking about anti-heroes. And that, like, at the time, I think I was maybe halfway through season 2. And it was very clear that they were setting up a redemption journey that, like, you know, that was where Zuko was headed. And obviously the last book was fire. Like, you know, clearly it was there. Yeah. It was telegraphed pretty far ahead that ultimately Aang was going to be learning firebending from Zuko. I mentioned then that I already like was here for it, whatever, to like pick up that thread, I guess, now that I have seen the whole thing. I agree with everything Sari just said. I will add that I think that in something that helps this particular story is the fact that he is a teenager. And so like he is very, very young. And so he is growing up. And so like he was indoctrinated into a lot of really bad shit. And like a lot of who he is at the beginning is a consequence of the really bad upbringing that he has. And he has to like learn about the world. And as he's chasing the Avatar, he has all of these encounters with the world. He gets to like literally, you know, travel this entire world. And he keeps coming across various people, especially once he goes into hiding, you know, people who don't know who he actually is. And he gets to hear these like firsthand accounts of how the war has harmed all of these other people who are not Fire Nation and whatnot. And I don't know, like he gets to have that very eye-opening journey. And so I think that is an important part of why this redemption arc is effective, that like he really learns about and understands the consequences of the war and of the like the way that the Fire Nation has conducted itself, and he's forced to then make this really active choice as opposed to, you know, like I am the prince of the Fire Nation and I like have to, you know, my destiny is to inherit the throne, whatever his ideas were about the world going into it, he has to really grapple with like this whole other side to the world. And I think that was just handled really, really well. I liked watching his whole journey with his uncle. And yeah,
I think I was paying attention a lot to his arc because I wanted to kind of see if I could pinpoint what made his arc work for me when a lot of times others don't. And I think part of it is kind of what you're talking about, Nicole, is that this was a redemption arc that is kind of in the context of a story that is generally about identity. And so all of these characters are really exploring their own identities, whether that's Aang, you know, coming into terms of being the Avatar, and not only that, but being the Avatar as a pacifist monk. And, you know, you have Katara, who's got like taken on this mom role, but she's trying to also, you know, learn waterbending. And you have Sokka, who is trying to be the warrior, and all of them are learning who they are. And I think in the context of that bigger story, it makes sense that Zuko was going through that transition as well. And so it wasn't a redemption arc that was just about doing bad things and then stop being those bad things and, trying, moving away from that. But it was really about like becoming who he's supposed to be and learning who he's supposed to be. And I loved that piece of the story in complement with everything that else that was happening. And I too think that, it was very earned and it was a journey. You said it was like a redemption journey, which, I think that's very accurate as well. And I like that we saw him kind of earning it and making those rounds and saying his apologies and then also learning who he is.
I think it shows in the exploration of your own identity how important the people surrounding you are too, because I feel like a really powerful part of Zuko's journey was the fact that he was traveling with his uncle Iroh, who in the first few episodes you meet him, it seems like he's being played off as comic relief. Like this is the old Asian uncle who likes drinking tea and playing games and isn't committed to this quest. But you find out that they have a really complicated father figure son relationship, and Iroh has been against the Fire Nation's domination for a while now. And I think Zuko especially is his identity is shaped by interacting with a lot of people around him. And that makes his journey really compelling and interesting too, because he is a character who in his angst could go it alone and does break off and does make bad choices sometimes when he separates himself from people, but he seems to grow the most when he's interacting with other humans in the world and using that to inform his own experience and thoughts and actions.
Speaking of being surrounded by other people, and I guess makes sense to sort of cycle through his merry band of people we care about.
People we care about.
Yes. Let's go through all.
Katara is also super important character here. What did you guys think about Katara?
I thought her development was really interesting. I think the thing that I liked least about her was her relationship, like the romantic relationship with Aang. And I think maybe that's just because I'm an old now and I'm like, you were kids. Like you were his babysitter and his teacher and now you're falling in love and sure, first romance, whatever. So that set aside, I think her arc and her journey was a really interesting one because I liked how her power, like water bending initially in the first book, is presented to us as this healing thing. And she is like this very motherly figure in the band. Like she's the responsible one. She's taking care of Aang. She's like his first teacher and like believes in him so much and helps drive him to want to save the world or like make a positive impact on the world. But by the third book, it was really interesting to me that they chose to have her explore her darker side. We learned that water bending could also be used as blood bending, and she does that a couple times in after interacting with a witch.
Really quick sidebar. Yeah. So I loved that, that element of it. You also mentioned, too, the fact that Toph, develops metal bending. So both the blood bending and the metal bending were two things that really early on were, while watching the show, I had a thought. I had the thought that, blood is water too, but dismissed that thought immediately as that's way too dark for a kid's show. So when that got brought up, I was like, oh damn, they're going there.
It went there.
Yeah. But the metal thing especially, that was one that I was like, but it's refined earth. It's earth. It's still earth. And so then when Toph figures it out, I'm like, yeah, go Toph. So that was really cool too, to have things that jumped out at me in the beginning that no, don't worry. The show has thought about them. Just wait.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Everything was thoughtful.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And I think Katara's character shows that a lot because I liked how she was set up as this healing figure, but everyone has their flaws. Everyone has her weak point is the fact that her mother got killed by the Fire Nation. And that's what instills her with the most amount of distrust and the most amount of anger that I can remember after having binge watched this series, basically. And so I like how she could have fallen into the nurturing female character in this merry band of heroes role. And to some extent, that was the trope that she supported the most and had the most elements from, but she was allowed to be fully fleshed out with and like have a complex range of emotions and be angry and learn that her powers are dark too.
I loved her. I really do love her as a character as well. I mean, I love them all, so that's not really surprising anyone. But
Yeah.
I think that two things kind of on what you mentioned. One is that I always view this romance between Aang and Katara as kind of on the same level as like a Will and Lyra from his Dark Materials and like a Saturday in September from the Fairyland, in that I enjoy it because I thought it was age appropriate and understandable as well. Like I could see from, you know, them being traveling together, being thrown together, and her being kind of older than him and him looking up to her. Like I saw where it was progressing and I didn't mind it. When you start putting in the context of how like everything ever, it almost feels like it has to have a romance component, I see why it kind of can get frustrating or whatnot. But I guess I consumed this in a time where it didn't bother me. And so as I reconsumed it, I was still kind of, yay, they're so cute together. So the romance didn't bother me personally. And then also I just generally loved her story because I appreciated that she got to be very powerful and hold her own next to Aang, who is, you know, the Avatar, but she is a water bending master in her own right. And she was super brave on every occasion. And she did have that like motherly instinct, which I liked because it meant like protection over all of them. And there are a few times that she, you know, went against the grain because, you know, she wanted to do something or she thought something was right and the others didn't. And then I did like that we saw the opposite of that in like the last book, that the pressure and, you know, just the responsibility of everything that she had carried, like kind of pushed her into a darker way. But that was part of her arc as well. So overall, I just love that she was a fully formed, very powerful character that got to play off of Aang. So
she was also cool as a foil for Zuko, that like, so she starts out being the most hopeful and being, again, the motherly figure in their group. And it is only in the last book that she finally has to start to process that like she also has a lot of anger, and like she was repressing that to like be supportive of the group and whatnot. But like, yeah, she has a lot of anger, and water, yes, it's healing, but like also you can do some fucked up shit with water bending. On the flip side, you have Zuko, who, you know, starts out on this big, like, I have to capture the Avatar, whatever. He's very clearly introduced as like a villain, but then, you know, he becomes more complex and like, you know, has to learn that, oh, hey, firebending, which like, you know, his own father burned his face. And Aang sort of learns firebending in the beginning, but he accidentally hurts Katara and then is like afraid to ever do it again and whatnot. And so in addition to Zuko as the villain and the Fire Nation more generally as villains, fire is also seen as like this bad thing. But then in the like final season, we're introduced to like firebending from love, kind of in conjunction with learning about like the darker side of waterbending. And I don't know, so it was really interesting the way that those two stories kind of played off of each other, that like Katara's journey and Zuko's journey had those kind of similar and opposing notes.
I think that this is probably like a side note and an undercurrent for why the Aang-Katara relationship was like meh, because I felt like because they were good foils, I was like, Katara and Zuko, like this is it. This is my OTP. Which is, yeah, dumb fun with media is shipping people. But
Sure.
It was like, look at, you lost your moms together, you can bond over that. You know, you've got opposite journeys, you can reconcile that together. Yeah.
Sure.
So what you're saying is you're gonna finish this podcast and then go write that fanfic, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm gonna become a Zutara fanfic writer, draw some fan art, and everything's fine.
Perfect.
Yep.
I can't wait. Don't forget to follow C.E. Riley on Twitter.
Yeah.
Follow all of the latest updates on her Zutara shipping journey.
Don't worry about it. I'm sure it's like been explored on the internet. I'm late to the fandom, but
it's fine.
It's fine.
Also, about Katara and kind of her her journey, the cool little journey that she gets to have. There's this really great moment where when they find Toph, the episode where they find Toph, she says something about like using her ways, like feminine, like it's implied that she's going to go like flirt with some boys to get information, but like actually she like beats them up with water bending basically. and it's just like, this is like one sort of specific example of something that is kind of done throughout that I really appreciate, that like that sort of blend of I don't know, ways of being quote unquote feminine. We talk about this a lot on Game of Thrones and whatnot, about kind of the Arya Sansa like dichotomy, and I felt like Katara was a really good like both, you know, option, yes, which was cool.
I think Toph to some extent was that too, and I was like so happy that was the way that they took her character, because she was initially set up as this warrior and very tomboyish, and in the play episode, which I have weird mixed feelings about, she was like so happy that she was played by this huge muscly dude in it. But she has in that story in that one episode where they had a bunch of mini arcs, she like went with Katara and got makeup done and felt really feminine and was expressing positive feels about that. So despite her being kind of like comic relief tomboyish, and that ties in with earthbending and being really connected and liking to be dirty and liking to be with the mud because she felt more comfortable, or like liking to be barefoot because that's how she sees. That was part of her character, but she was not dismissive of other expressions of femininity, which it could have fallen into that trap really easily, I feel like.
They have that great moment too, where in the episode where Appa is shedding and the boys are like playing around, and Sokka's using it as like to make hair, and Aang uses it to make beard, and she's like, I'm so glad we finally have another girl with us. And then Toph comes out and she's using it to make like armpit hair, and she like in the end of that, like even Katara laughs, like she laughs along with it, like she gives in. Right. So I think that this show did a good job definitely saying that you can be both, and you know, there's a range of expressions, and I really enjoyed that they both got to explore more traditionally feminine sides to themselves, whatever that means. But you know, that never took away from the power of either of these two as benders, and kind of the importance of their role within the group as well.
I will say there was a few moments that I could have done without, where they were like pitted against each other in ways that I was like, like it didn't feel inconsistent with their characters to have them at odds. And so like, I get it. But also, again, as we kind of come back to a lot on this podcast, like none of these things are created in a vacuum. And so like the fact that the only two girls in the group were the ones who were like quarreling with each other in that way was kind of like, okay, do we really have to? Could we not?
So I am super curious to hear about how you guys thought that the series ended, and specifically about how like everything was resolved in terms of the revolution and the showdown with the Fire Lord and the lion turtle, because even before, like I wasn't obviously in the fandom when this came out, but I finished watching it when I binge watched it the first time, and I was aware of how divisive that ending was, and how people either like love or hate the lion turtle thing and the energy bending. So I'm very curious how you guys saw that and what you thought of the conclusion of the conflict overall.
It had not occurred to me until just now that it would be divisive. I like, now that you say it, yes, I totally get why that would upset and bother people. It didn't bother me. They because there are just so many weird mystical spirit quest elements that happen throughout the series. So like, I don't know. There are so many other things that you had to accept before the lion turtle that like, whatever. I don't know why this should bother me any more than anything else. And sure, that's fine. I also, the fact that Ty Lee had that ability to like hit people at certain pressure points and take away their bending already kind of like introduced the idea that you like, so there was Ty Lee hitting people at certain pressure points. There was also the way the sun and the moon affected the fire and water benders respectively. So like I don't know, there was already the idea that there were things that could add to or detract from one's bending power that were like outside of yourself, like outside of, you know, beyond just you have the ability to bend. And so to me, the idea that the Avatar, you know, whose entire objective is to keep things in balance, that like one of his abilities would be ultimately to take away someone's bending seems like, yeah, like, yes, of course, that's the resolution to this. So I don't know.
Yeah, I also did not think of it as divisive. I think I was all in for the story that they were telling. And so I was ready to be taken on this roller coaster wherever it took me. And it didn't feel out of place in the world in all the ways that you were describing, Nicole. I think that, like, personally, I thought it was I didn't know how they were going to resolve Aang's main struggle, which was in that last book, the fact that he would maybe have to kill someone, and was not okay with that, like fundamentally not okay with that. And he talked to his past forms about instances in which they had restored balance to the world and was trying to be different than that. And I thought that this was a really interesting way for him to be different than that, because if he had killed Fire Lord Ozai, it would almost feel like a failure in some, or I don't know, it would just, they would have to have grappled with that differently, and he would have had to face the consequences of that differently. And I think that could have been an interesting story to tell too. But I think this fit in with Aang's morals as they have been laid out throughout the story, and resolved his like central internal chosen one conflict in a really like good way, where he was able to still be him and still be that kid and still be that person who cares a lot about human life, that was driving him throughout this whole series, and having that wrap up in a like thematically appropriate way.
I think what people mostly, I mean, I think there are people who probably wanted Aang to kill the Fire Lord, and that just, it could have been possible, but I think I'm with Sari that it would have taken it in a very different direction. It would have been a darker story for sure. And then, like, what's the moral of the story there? Like, you know, betray your morals and yourself and your identity.
Right.
I don't know. Like, it would have been a very, very fundamentally different story. And I think that it's very impactful and very telling that even though people were telling him, like, no, just kill him, just do it, he still found a way at the end of the day to be true to himself. And again, in a story that is very heavily focused on identity, I think that that's kind of the way that it had to end. So I think that's one portion of it. And I think probably the other portion is just kind of like the appearance of the lion turtle and the energy bending. But Nicole, you touched on as well that I think that this stuff was teased out. And I got super excited when you were talking about like metal bending and blood bending, because I think that the story did a good job of being like, here are the 4 nations. And then it was like teasing that there might be like a bigger like world out there, or more to each of the powers than we were seeing. So metal bending, blood bending, and then energy bending. So it wasn't something that came completely out of, you know, left field or came up during the 11th hour. I felt like there were enough breadcrumbs there that when it finally did appear, it was another spirit, which, I mean, we saw pandas and we saw koi fish, and you know, this is just like, fine, we did just another spirit animal. And you know, this was another extension of what bending could do, that it felt natural enough in the world that I was like, yay, he didn't have to kill him, you know, like I was all for that conclusion and the way that it happens.
Yeah, and I really liked that kind of world building in stories too, where it's like, here are the ground rules of the world. Here are the 4 elements that we know of and the big pillars of it, but there's still room to explore in it. We don't know all the capabilities of this fictional world in the same way that we don't know all the capabilities in our real world. Like, there's still tons of things that we're discovering here too. So it's totally conceivable to me that in this world where the spirit realm and the physical realm intertwine so much, where bending elements is a set part of their society and their cultures, that you can push those in different directions and push it farther than anyone could have ever imagined before. And it didn't feel so far out of left field. That was like, now you're just breaking everything. You've broken your world.
Right.
The world was still intact. It was just pushed in a different direction.
Yeah. Like science, like all the things that we don't know in our own world. Like that's similar to saying like, oh, they sent a man to the moon. That was, it stopped making sense then.
Yeah.
That, I don't know. I was with them. All seemed very real. All of the science that they were doing. But then, I don't know.
Yeah. We left Earth and...
This is funny, fake. But it's funny, but it's not, because of people who are like, grumble, science isn't real.
That's true.
It's like climate change, but it's snowing, and you're just like, oh, Jesus.
Hey, Grandpa.
That's not how science works.
I have a question, I think would be interesting. This is like something that has occurred to me because I really like how you've been framing it in context of identity, Mari. How did you feel about the pacing of the series and how the plot was laid out? Because I felt like this was almost a bunch of character studies altogether, which I loved because I love character work. But I just want to know, what do you think about like the way that the stories was laid out and paced and timed and introduced and things like that?
That's a great question. Let me think about this.
I don't even know if I know my feelings yet, but it's something that occurred to me mid-conversation where I was like, yeah, I could track each character, but I don't know how I feel about, like, there were parts that I felt were slow, there were parts I felt were breezed over, and I don't know.
So I have some scattered feelings, and I'm hoping that if I start talking about them, I might reach a conclusion. So one is that I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get to the movie in the next episode, but I think part of where the movie fails is that it takes a lot of that character study away and leaves just the action. And it has to, because it's a movie versus like the 61 episodes or whatever it was. But so I think that without the character study, that you have a very basic story here, really, of good versus evil, and it excels because of these characters and because of that found family. So there was never a moment when we were pausing to look more in depth at one of their relationships or at one of their arcs that I felt like, oh, here we go, just get to it. Like, never, the end game was never really that important to me, especially because I felt like we knew at the end of the day that good was going to triumph over evil. That's the story. When you have such a good and pure hero, that's what the story has to be. So to me, it was more about the journey of getting there than the end. So I never felt rushed. And then the other thing is that I think it's always difficult for me to talk about pacing, especially like across a work when I'm binging something, because in a lot of ways, and especially because this is a finished series, like I was controlling my pacing, and they are such short, it's like 20 to 24 minute episodes, 25-minute episodes. So they're short and they're quick and they're easily consumable. So I would watch a bunch of episodes and, eat them all up. And then we're like, okay, I'm done now, and come back to it the next day. So when you're controlling your pace so much that way, it's really difficult to say what the story gets wrong or right in that aspect. But for the most part, I don't think that it ever felt draggy, just because whether they were, writing on giant fish or actually learning bending, like I wanted to be there and I wanted to be watching this. And, both of those things were equally important to me. And so none of it felt draggy, if that makes sense.
That's a really interesting point too about controlling your pace. I bought the DVDs of the show, and that is how Sarah and I watched it. And so like each disc had like 5 episodes on it. And so like if I put the disc, like I was going to watch all of a disc at a time, so it was just like a question of like, will I watch 1 disc or 2 today? Yeah. It was like, that was basically it. But that's really interesting. I I don't really have anything else to add beyond that. Like, I agree. I think that the pacing worked really well for me, but it is impossible for me to comment on what it would have been like to consume at like a weekly pace or in any other way than the way in which I consumed it. We had this conversation with Westworld too about how different it might have been for people who watched it weekly as opposed to just like watching it in basically one go or close to one go, and how you didn't, when you didn't have a whole week to sit with and discuss with the internet all of the little Easter eggs that they seeded and stuff, what a different experience that would make it. And so in the same way, I can only speak to this experience of watching it, in which case the pacing worked really well for me.
I can't imagine that the like 25-minute episode once a week, I don't know if it was a weekly thing or whatnot, but I can project that might have been a little bit unsatisfying just because it is so much time in between and because each little episode doesn't do a ton to like move things forward. It really is about like the season as a whole moving Aang one step closer to where he's going. So I can maybe foresee that would be a little bit frustrating, but again, like Nicole said, that's like projecting and I really don't know. So
I think, if anything, I wish that sometimes we spent more time with characters than we did, but I think that is just like my curiosity about the world and the characters and the story, and I wouldn't have actually added in any extra episodes, but there were definitely times where it was like, oh man, Aang and Katara have been really practicing their water bending, and we didn't see their training montage, and so that's been happening behind the scenes, and like I would have liked to see all those little moments, but also that's the stuff that can be cut out and be relegated to fan spaces.
Yeah, you don't need that.
Yes.
It's understood that as they're traveling, they're practicing.
Yes. Yeah. And so you don't need to see all the minutia steps of their journey, even though I'm sure that people would have consumed that too. But most interestingly, I guess, was the play episode in the last season. It might have been like this right before the 4-episode finale or an episode or two before that, where just having watched 50 some episodes, watching their entire journey, that play episode just stood out to me as like, I just watched all this, and this is like a very goofy recap of it now. And it's giving them a chance to process their journey and also like just make jokes in kind of a weird Muppet commentary way where like, look, we're watching our stage versions of ourselves. Ha ha ha. And I think I would have experienced that episode in particular very, very differently if I was watching it live and it was like, I could
use... This is all you get this week?
Yeah. This weird thing that I already know. And because it was already like, I know all this, and I don't know whether I would have been more disappointed where it was like, well, I want to get to like the meat of the things that were right before the climax of the series. So give me more. Or would I have liked it as like, oh, I appreciate this because I haven't watched. It's been years since all these episodes have coming out. And so this is kind of like fun and cute and good. But that episode just stood out to me as like this is a weird pause, calm before the storm moment. Yeah. And I don't know.
If I had to pick a least favorite episode of the show, it would probably be that one.
I will say that there is something to be said about watching this show at a slower pace or a rewatch, because I mostly binged it again for the purpose of doing this podcast, but on second watch, there was so many little things that I caught, and I think there are just so many of those little things, or even of some of the animation or the animation style that are better when you're taking your time with these things. And it doesn't seem that way, I think, sometimes to me watching the show, because it is kind of, it can be, like we said, a little childlike and it has those moments of humor, but just small things from like when they were in the buried library, Aang says something about a lion turtle. He like sees one, or he says something, and I was like, what? Wait, hold on. Like they mentioned this halfway through the series, and then so when it comes up at the end, like we had already heard about it. And then they're just little things about Aang too. Like I don't know why I noticed this, but throughout the series, Aang just has a penchant for riding on things, like Appa, obviously, but he rides on the canyon crawlers and the unagi, and he rides on seals, and he rides on fish. Like he just really likes to ride things. So every time it popped up on screen, it was like a genuine LOL moment for me. And just noticing like those small things that they weave in that really add nothing to nothing. Like he even rides his little air bubble thing that he made up. So, but that they add like just in a little, another thread of like world and character building. So even though we can talk about, you know, the benefit of binging in terms of controlling your pace, there is also something to be said for rewatching and slowing it down, because they do throw in like those special treats in there as well.
I think that's something that I would want to rewatch it for, because I was paying such close attention to character and plot and just like getting the story that I feel like I didn't fully appreciate the world building details that they added in. Like the one piece of trivia that I knew about it going into it was that each of the bending styles was based on a real martial arts style. And Nicole and I watched one of the DVD extras in which the animators were taking martial arts lessons so that they could understand how the characters would move. And that was just mind-boggling to me that they would do that, because like in all the animation and comic book drawing advice that I've been given or heard, it's like, you are the actors. You are the people. You have to move these characters in exaggerated, in realistic ways. And if someone is like standing still in the background, that is the exact same as if an extra in a live action show was standing in the background doing nothing. And so you have to think about weight and movement and everything. And I think they did such a good job with making the bending styles look unique, even though I wasn't paying super close attention to that. And even down to things like the food in the different cultures, they were all like, water bending was clearly influenced by, and all the water tribes were influenced by different Asian cultures than the Earth Kingdom societies, which was different than the Fire Kingdom societies, and all the touches that they had with their clothing and their hair and their food and their traditions and things like that. I feel like it feels like they did their research in a really thorough, affectionate way. From the cultures that they were pulling from. And so I feel like in a rewatch, I would pay more closer attention to that. Or I just want to like read a show Bible and figure out where they got all their influences from. Historical or real or fictional or whatever. Because I don't know, it like makes my heart happy to know that they put so much thought into it in that way.
I love the word affectionate to describe this show as a whole. It describes my experience of it, and it just describes like some portion of the storytelling and of the world and of the creation as well. So beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Good note to end on.
And on that beautiful note, we will end this episode here. Thank you so much for listening. And we would love to chat with you about all of your feelings about Avatar: The Last Airbender. You can find us at SnarkSquad.com, where we will have a post dedicated to this episode. You can also find us on Twitter at Snark_Squad. You can find me at My Name is Marines.
I'm at Sweeney Says.
I'm at C. Riley.
Thank you to Stefan Chin for the fancy outro music that you are currently listening to. And you can find us again next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye.